Good morning, Oakwood artist. It is Tuesday, August 11th. It is our 75th day of sketching together. 75 days. Wow. Has time gone by? Some days it's very, very slow, and other days the whole month has flown by. So I wonder how time is going for you. If it's been quick, or if it's dragging on, or if it's so strange the days kind of just blur together these days. This week we are talking about perspective in drawing, and yesterday we talked about vanishing points, and we made a cube. Today we're going to use the horizon, and we're going to make a vanishing point, and we're going to draw train tracks. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at a set of train tracks head on. They're going to be really simple for this drawing, and if I really was invested in making train tracks, I would really challenge myself to put a train on the tracks. So maybe I will do that later on. So the perspective I'm going to look is head on those train tracks. So they're going to be looking straight ahead at us, at least for this train track, to get the sense of that vanishing point in art. So I'm going to make a horizon up here. Of course, no horizon would be straight across, but for the purpose of my landscape here, I'm going to imagine this is, well, it isn't straight anyways, because I think you may have heard me say before, I can't draw a straight line even with a ruler, so very good point there that I just cannot do it. So I'm going to make my vanishing point there, and I actually physically make that dot so that it's there for me to work from. So really, if we were looking at the landscape, we'd find that with our eye. It would be where our eyesight goes to the horizon, where it vanishes at the horizon line. Okay, so I'm going to turn my palette or my sketchbook towards me a little bit here, and because I'm not quite center, I'm going to maybe change my dot up a little bit, move my dot a little more center, and then I'm going to make my train tracks. So what I'm going to do, without being out there and seeing a set of train tracks, and I realize my pencil is not working, very dark here. I'm just making a guess at this, but I know when I look at certain things out there with perspective that things are going to vanish. The illusion that they vanish, right? That they don't really, but that there is that illusion of them vanishing. So I'm going to do the other side of my train tracks, and using my same vanishing point. They're all tracks are coming to the same point. This can even be a road for all that matter. Now, we might not get this perspective as we look down a road, but there are points when we do look down the road and get that perspective. Now, oftentimes things will have curves, and certainly not a train track, but it does turn. A train track does have turns in it. This one is straight. We're working with some straight railroad ties here, and or iron, and we are going to make our train track. So looking straight down them, this is the perspective that I would see if I were working with a vanishing point in the distance. Now I'm trying to think, if I've stood on train tracks and looked down, I probably haven't had that perspective of seeing them vanish in the distance. I probably have seen them more parallel, but I am working on vanishing to the point that you no longer see them. So that point back there, that they've vanished over the horizon. Okay, so I'm going to work in a little bit of detail. Well, this is a little tricky because, of course, my detail would really start to vanish as it goes back. So I started thicker down here in the foreground, and as they go to the background, definitely is disappearing. Okay, we talked last week or a week ago or two about atmospheric perspective, that that Leonardo da Vinci used in his Mona Lisa, and that how things become hazy as they get further away. Hazy and blue becomes that atmospheric perspective. So how can I create that illusion that there is depth and it goes on and on forever when I'm working in pencil? Well, if I'm putting some pine trees in back there, they're really hazy, but if I'm putting a pine tree in, and I am using like I'm using a 2H, and that is not my favorite pencil to use. So I find the H series, whether it's a 4 or it's a 2, is really, really fine, and it doesn't give me a lot of color. Even though I'm pushing really hard right now, I'm not getting much tone, and that can be really, it can be hard for me to work with that. Okay, so there is a pine tree. Much more detail, even though it's very simple detail, than these back here that are hazy in the distance. So while that's not the perspective we're working with today, we're not working with atmospheric, I wanted to bring that back to us from Leonardo. Okay, now I'm going to put the other rail in on my track. I really recommend, if you're working with perspective, as we're working this week, don't do what I'm doing. Don't work on an easel. Lay it flat in front of you, because my perspective is going to get really askew here, and it's not going to look very good to you as I'm showing it to you. But you get the general idea of the perspective that I'm trying for. I also haven't seen train tracks in a while, haven't been on them, so I'm sure I'm not putting the railroad ties at the distance that they need to be, but that's okay for this rough drawing today. So if I were drawing a train on this track, the front of the engine, front of the locomotive would be very big. I'd see the front of it, and then as the cars went back, they would get smaller and smaller on this track. Now, of course, that's not how they are in real life, right? Kids sometimes, when they see perspective out in nature, it really does play with your eyes, and you do think, wow, why is that little bitty car on the back of that huge train? Well, that's just an illusion created by perspective. Okay, so I'm starting to put in my ties. As I go back, they would get smaller. They'd even get smaller as I'm not so far back. Okay, so that's what I've ended up with today. Not a lot of detail, very simple. You might not like line drawing with rulers or perspective. I'm not a big fan of it, but I think it has a lot to teach us in terms of how we see things, how we create things, the scale of things, that something in the background is much smaller in scale, even though this pine tree in front here is maybe even smaller than these tiny ones, how they appear in the back there. It helps us understand perspective. It also understands like what makes an interesting concept, what makes an interesting layout in our drawings, and what could we play with in design when it comes to horizon lines and scale, I guess. Okay, happy art making. I'll see you back here tomorrow on Wednesday, where we're going to be working on buildings, houses and buildings drawings in perspective. Okay, see you. Have a wonderful day.